Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for stopping by. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create this beautiful Wednesday-inspired birthday card. Now, I've been watching this show as well as a lot of other people and just thought the stained glass window from the show would be really, really cool for a stained glass card. So the very first step, I have the mat that's going to go onto the front of my card, and I'm cutting out the web. Now for this particular die cut, we don't actually need the web die cut. We only need the opening to it. So the actual web part can just get tucked away for a future project. So I did put some die tape on the die to keep it in place while I was running it through the machine. Just be careful while you're taking that tape off of the paper. We don't want it to rip. Sometimes even die tape, sometimes the pressure of the machine makes it stick really, really well to paper. So once we've got the opening in the front, what I did was cut out 3 black spider web die cuts, and I am going to use the die cut for this and not the opening. And then the next step, I'm putting that mat on the front of my card base, taping it into place, and then I'm placing that spider web die in the same opening that I created on that mat. That way I'm going to have it all completely lined up when I go to put my card together. And this is the easiest way to do it. Once again, I'm using that same die tape to make sure that nothing shifts or moves while I run it through the machine. To put the mat on the front of the card, I did have it closed. You need to make sure to open that card up before running it through the machine because we don't want that spider web die cut to go through the entire card. We only want it on the front of the card base. And once again, be very careful when taking the tape off of your paper. If you happen to have any tape residue left on your paper once you've taken it off, you can use an adhesive remover. You can find these at a lot of different scrapbook stores. I'll have it linked down in the description below as well as all the other supplies that I'm using. But it's a perfect tool for taking any adhesive residue off. So this particular die cut comes with a spider hanging from the web die. And while that's not really part of the show, I thought it was really cute with the web. So I cut 3 of those out of the same black cardstock that I cut the web out of. The reason I cut 3 black webs is I'm going to layer them on top of each other. And actually, I just realized I misspoke. I cut 4, and you'll see what the 4th one is used for later. So I'm gluing my webs on top of each other just to give them a little bit of extra dimension and extra stiffness. The cardstock that I'm using isn't really, really thick, so this is going to make it thicker and just give it more substance for the front of the card. You don't necessarily need to put the glue over the entire die cut. I'm making sure that it goes around all of the edges and then a little bit in the center as well. And I'm using some distressed collage medium to glue it so that if any of that glue seeps out, it dries completely matte and it dries completely clear, so you'll never know the glue was there. Once the web is glued together, I'm going to take the spider hanging from the web die cut and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to stack those 3 on top of each other and then set them aside to dry. And I typically like to use an acrylic block to hold it in place. I apologize for my voice sounding weird. I'm just getting over a sore throat and a bug that's been going through our house, so it's a little bit off. So while I'm waiting for my web to dry, I'm going to take a piece of acetate and I'm going to glue it to the back of the mat that we created that has the die cut of the web out of it. This is going to be for the stained glass window part. And the same distressed collage medium that I used to stack the web and the spider together will work for this. It works perfectly on non-porous surfaces as well as paper. So I'm going to put that onto the back of that mat, and then I'm going to put another acrylic block on top of it just to hold it in place. It doesn't take very long to dry, and once it is dry, I can flip it over to the front side of that piece of paper so the acetate is on the back of this, and then I'm going to take those webs that we stacked and glued together, and I'm going to glue that into that opening of the window. So once again, I don't necessarily need to put glue on the entire back of this die cut. Around the edges and a little bit in the center is good enough. Once the edges are secure, the rest of it isn't really going to pick up, so you don't necessarily need to worry about the whole thing. So it should fit right into that opening like a puzzle. And then once I've got it set in there, once again, I'm going to put an acrylic block on that just to hold it down while it dries. Because we're gluing some paper onto some acetate, the glue basically only dries from one end. So by putting the acrylic block on top of that. That just gives it some weight and holds it flat. Before I go any further, I'm going to take a black Copic marker, and I'm using the chisel edge from that marker, and I'm putting the long end of the chisel along the side of my cardstock, and I'm going to just go around all 4 edges. This creates the look of a mat, but it eliminates another piece of cardstock. You could take some black cardstock and create a mat with that. This is just an easier way to do it without having to put that web part in exactly the right spot once again. So just a little cheater way to do it. After I've got that black outline on there, I'm going to flip my piece of paper over, and I put a Post-it note on the side of the stained glass window that I don't want to color. I have some Copics here that I chose that are very similar to the stained glass window in the show, and I'm going to fill in some of the areas of that stained glass window. I have a picture on the side, and I was going to try get it exact as possible to the show, but because this web is completely different, I don't think it really matters. So I'm taking my Copics and I'm just coloring that back of the acetate, and you'll see here I did a mark that I didn't really like. Some of the stained glass pieces in the actual window are striped, and I wasn't really paying attention, and they actually go along with the shape of the web. And in order to remove that first part that I did, I just took a different color and colored right over top of it. It picked up that alcohol ink. So I am using some Copic markers. Some of these you'll find will be a little bit more dark in color than others. You could also use Sharpies, that would work as well, but Sharpies won't be quite as transparent and stained glass looking, which is why I chose to use the Copic markers. So I'm just coloring the different areas of the window, and then I'm also taking some and I'm creating some areas that are striped and have a bunch of different colors in them. And obviously I'm just using the colors and trying to emulate the stained glass window in the show. But this technique will work for any die shape, any image, any way of creating a stained glass window. The Copics are perfect for this because they are transparent and they are forgiving if you happen to color in a section that you didn't really like and want to fix it. So it's kind of nice that way that you have a little bit of leeway. So you're going to keep going until you've got the whole thing filled out. And you can just keep tweaking it until you're pleased with your result. You can see that I'm working on with a piece of scrap paper behind it. This is just so that I can see the colors a little bit better, as well as the fact that that way you can see what I'm doing a little bit better. So you will find if you have a dark background behind this, because the colors are transparent, you won't be able to see what you're doing as well. So just a little tip, a little piece of scrap paper behind there will help you see exactly what you're doing, just a little bit easier. If you wanted to try it with other mediums, alcohol inks just in the bottle would work as well. The only thing is, because I want some precision with this particular design, we'll have a little bit more control with a marker. When using fluid alcohol inks, it does create a beautiful stained glass look because they are transparent, but you just don't have the control in fitting in a certain area. Now you'll see here as I am putting some stripes in some of the areas, I'm coloring my marker off on the scrap paper, and that's just because I'm picking up some darker colors on my yellow marker and I just want to clean them off. It's not going to hurt the marker at all. It may stain it a little bit, but it's not going to ruin your marker by doing this. But you just do want to make sure to clean off your marker before putting them away so that you know you don't have something else on the tip of the marker. So once the stained glass window is done, it can be glued to the front of the card. Now originally I was going to glue it the way you see, because typically when you're putting the mat onto the front of the card, you have the card front and you're just placing it on. But in the end, you'll see I flip it over and have this matte piece laying down, and then I put my card base on top of it. And the main reason is that way I can see where the opening is in my card front and I can line it up perfectly. By having the mat this way, as you see, I actually can't really see where the opening is on the front of the card. So a little tip there, it's just easier to do it kind of backwards. But this way you can see exactly where that die cut is, and it's easier to line up. And you don't have to worry about the front part lining up because we've already done that when we die cut the piece. Once we've got that window die cut, or sorry, that window glued to the front of the card and lined up, the next thing we're going to do is take that fourth spider web die cut and we're going to glue it into that opening on the card. This just creates a nicer finished look on the back of your stained glass window and on the inside of your card. This isn't a step that's absolutely necessary. You could eliminate it if you want. Like I said, I just like it because I find that it just creates a nicer finished look on the inside of my card. And same as the front of the spider web, this will just fit right in just like a puzzle piece, and it'll line up with the spider webs on the front part of the acetate. If you happen to have any glue seep out, just wipe it off with your finger. Once again, this is using distress collage medium that dries completely matte and completely clear, so you won't see where it is, but you do want to take any excess off before we put an acrylic block on there to hold it in place. While we are waiting for our card base to dry, I die cut a happy birthday sentiment. This is a die that has a shadow around it as well. So I cut the happy birthday 3 times at a white because I wanted to layer it and stack it up just to give it some extra stability and dimension as well. The top one is actually glossy cardstock to give it a little bit of different texture. So I'm going to stack those up on top of each other, and then I'm going to add them to the shadow in black that I have just to the side there. So I wanted to emulate the colors in the stained glass window, so I'm going to keep the birthday part of the die cut just white, and I will take those same Copic markers that I used on the stained glass window and I will color the happy part of the sentiment with it, just to kind of tie those two in together. So once I have all of those die cuts glued together, I do briefly put them aside with an acrylic block over top of them, just to hold it in place and give it some security while it's drying. All of the supplies that I've used and even the colors of the Copics that I'm using will be listed and linked in the description down below. So if there's anything that you're wondering, you'll likely find the answers down there, or else leave a comment and I will let you know the answer to your question. So because Happy has 5 letters to it and I only have 4 Copic colors that I'm using, I decided to do one of the letters striped, kind of like the striped glass in the stained glass window. Now in the end, I wish I had changed the order of the colors that I had used, but that's okay. This is the first try and it's just an idea I had in my head and had to get out some way. So I am happy with the end result, but I wish that yellow H was kind of at the end of the letter. It's just a personal preference. No, I didn't do it on this particular card, but you could go further once this is attached to the front of the card and add some glossy accents to this sentiment just to give it a little bit more gloss to it. Or you could even take some stickles and put some stickles on top of it to add a little bit of sparkle and glitter. The Copic colors will still show up underneath there, but if you wanted to add just a little bit of a different texture to the front of the card to give it a bit more interest, that's another idea. Now I'm using Copic marker for this. Any other alcohol-based marker would work as well. They work very similar to each other. And like I mentioned before, you could use Sharpies for the stained glass window. You could also use Sharpies for coloring in the sentiment as well to make sure that that coordinates with what you did for your stained glass window. Once you've got the sentiment how you like, you're going to take some adhesive and glue it to the front of the card. Once again, putting an acrylic block or something a little bit heavier on top of it just to hold it in place while it's drying. Once I have that sentiment on there and I have the acrylic block on there holding it in place, I'm going to take my spider that is hanging from the web die cut and I'm going to glue that to the right side of the card just to add that little detail to them. And I think that detail really finishes the card off. Now, the one thing that I didn't do on this card that I was debating is just taking a sparkly gel pen and just adding a little bit of sparkle to the black web. You know how spider webs kind of glisten in the sunlight? I kind of thought that might be really pretty on here, but I didn't want to take away from it. And because that doesn't really go with the theme of the show, I figured I would just leave that off of here. But just another idea if you wanted to add a little bit of different texture. And here's the final result. I think it turned out really, really well. Thank you so much for spending your time with me, and please hit subscribe before you leave.